Great. Thank you so much for joining us. We are honored. We are thankful that you could join us and share your learnings, insights, journey, and strategies, tips, insights with our community.
I'm very honored to be invited, Naimul, and
Thank
it's going to be great to communicate with you and the others joining the session.
All right, let's kick it off. For the community, I would say let's make it interactive. If you have some questions, something that you want to learn from Leonard's journey, just paste it in the chat and I'll try to blend it into our conversation today. But Leonard, let's start at the very beginning. Can you share a bit about your journey into angel investing, venture capital? What sparked your interest to move to this side of things?
Well, I got invited to go to Stanford
Mhm,
after I had finished my licentiate thesis,
mhm,
and the invitation was due to that um, I and five Swedish researchers studied long-term economic growth
mhm.
and what was driving it. And my role was to study the interaction between foreign trade and long-term economic growth. And I noticed in my study that Sweden had switched its international specialization from before the Second World War to after. And it was basically trying to qualify for the new structure in the decades that followed. So that was the situation when I came to Stanford.
All
So,
right.
and there, very soon I met with people privately who worked in high-tech companies. And they told me about Stanford Industrial Park, which is the birthplace of Silicon Valley. And Silicon Valley was not then a concept because this was more than 50 years ago.
Awesome, awesome. So pre-Silicon Valley, how was the situation? Did we have what kind of quantum was there in terms of startups or investors? So, because business has existed for quite some time, but if we rewind back to that time, did we still have startups? Did we still have tech as a center engine?
Yes, as we had in Sweden a startup market which was small and
Mhm.
dominated by the public sector institutions that provided the capital for startups. And then there were a few uh, wealthy or just very interested,
Mhm.
engaged people, and they invested in startups they were contacted by. And the most famous of them were people in the Wallenberg ecosystem, managing directors and the Wallenbergs themselves and so on. And they invested in high tech.
Okay. So public sector and wealthy individuals were the main sources, and the investment was going into high tech. What were some of the challenges at that time? If you, and then we can maybe telescope it to this time as well. But what were some of the challenges that you saw in the sector, in the startup and angel
Well,
investing sector at
there
that time?
were no arenas basically
Mm,
for startups to present themselves to investors. And the arenas were either through the public sector
mm,
uh, institutions or via the banks where they were in Sweden. Um, and so it was very difficult for startups with ambitions
okay,
to raise capital.
okay. And So great. So public sector and banks were kind of facilitators at this time, and startups themselves. I think the sector itself was very early stage. Let's move to STOAF. Um, Tell us about your journey there. What got STOAF started, and how has your journey been over the years with this?
I had been engaged in business angel companies outside of Stockholm.
Okay.
There was one in Roslagen where I
Hmm.
was heavily engaged. Um, there was one on the west coast, Västkustens Affärsänglar, which
Hmm.
still exists, and there was one in Småland.
Okay.
And somebody got to know about these who was from Stockholm, and he said, "Why don't you engage in a Stockholm business
Hmm.
angel company or network?" So I said, "Can you find the investors? Then I will." But he couldn't find the investors.
Hmm.
And I felt that my network was already exhausted from all the investments they had made. So it took some time, and that led us to the year 2007. Late that year, I held the first seminar for a group of 8 people, I think. And then it continued until May 2008, in the middle of the international financial market crisis.
Hmm.
He decided to set it up with less angels and much less money than it was originally planned. So I was challenged because I did not believe in the amount of capital we had. And then some of them said to me, just wait, and if this works, we will invest more. And as it turned out, we never really came up to the original capital engagement. And as regards the engagement of competencies,
Hmm.
that everybody had said they would be active. After 1 year, there were 3 of us who were
Okay.
active. So me and my CEO, we worked much more than the half time we had committed to as a result. So, and we struggled along, and on the journey, some more were added to the network. So I think we became 20, around 20 in the first STOA fund. And I and my CEO came to the conclusion that this would not work in terms of scaling the network's capital. So we said, let's restart. We had
Okay.
committed to 3 years, and this was after 2.5. So he said, I won't be with you for the next STOA fund. And but the third guy, who is
Mm.
still with STOA 3, he said he could step into the CEO role. And with
Okay.
that, we started.
So, was this similar in other networks? Because you talked about Roslagen, you talked about West Coast, Smallland, and other networks that you've been part of. Were similar? Was the situation similar in such networks, or was it only unique to this particular network?
Well, what we did,
Mm.
it was because I said I won't engage unless we structure the business and
Okay.
have real business model
Mm.
for scaling. And the West Coast Angels have succeeded because they were clever in their first investments. And with that, they were able to attract both more capital and new angels that substituted for angels that left the network.
Okay. Okay.
Roslagen finally died. I had then left
Okay.
that network, and they died because they did not find successful investments, basically.
Okay. Very interesting. You talked about very early in your career your experience in Silicon Valley. I think this is a question very similar to Lars was here, Lars Lindgren, a couple of weeks ago. So I had this question for him as well, and for you as well. Like you have seen the other side of the markets. You talked about Stanford, Silicon Valley, or pre-Silicon Valley era, and then you have been involved in the Swedish ecosystem. What kind of fundamental differences or similarities exist between these two sides? So on one side, we have Silicon Valley and the global West Coast, let's say, and then we have Sweden. So are there any similarities or differences, or how would you compare the two ecosystems?
Well, Silicon Valley had very early wealthy people who wanted to invest in spin-offs from leading universities there.
Okay.
And it was the same around Boston. And in Silicon Valley, they early on set up limited partnerships as the vehicle through which the investment went. And so they had a legal structure that functioned well from the beginning. Sweden
Okay.
did not have that. And the other contrasting thing was that an investment banker from New York left New York and went to Silicon Valley and invested in a company called Intel. They had 8 founders that jumped off their initial high-tech company because the founder treated them like babies. Arthur Rock invested in the Intel and immediately gave them the incentives to succeed.
Okay.
And that created the model that became the standard in Silicon Valley. The business angel market as such was not a dormant market, but in terms of successful startups that made it big, it was not very dominating. And it was in the 1990s that this was changed when a group of knowledgeable and in a variety of areas skilled people set up the Band of Angels.
Okay.
They were 8 people only, and they grouped around spin-offs from Stanford primarily. And they, in the crisis that came after the millennium shift, the people who were the most influential in selecting companies, they saw that the money was not coming in as it had before. So they decided that unless we set up a company, joint company together with capital to invest, we won't be able to enter startups early. So they set up this incorporated structure in the middle of the angel network, supplying the capital, and got stability out of that.
Okay.
And that led me to when I started STOAF to have co-investments as a right for the limited partners or business angels. So not only did STOAF as an incorporated company invest, but the angels were invited to co-invest as well. And that took off. So that has become a distinguishing feature of the three STOAF funds.
Okay. Got it. Got it.
In the second STOAF fund, I also introduced differences between those engaged, depending on whether they wanted to engage with competence as well as capital or only capital. And for those who wanted to invest their competence and time, I said, I want to educate you in order for you to use the same language and so that the communication would be facilitated. We use the same concept for the same definition for key concepts.
Okay. Okay. Amazing. I think a great grasp on how the Silicon Valley shaped up wealthy people, university spin-offs, a legal structure, Intel you talked about, and then you talk about the band of angels, 8 people. The eight number is quite significant because when you were presenting the STOAF concept, that was also 8 people. So maybe
Yes.
there is some significance there. But great to have a capture of the history and the structure. Maybe we can take a couple of minutes and talk about your connection with Connect. Like, how did this happen? Like, because I think it was when you co-founded Innovation Markets, or if you can go into that for a minute, and then we go directly into angel investing.
I had published some articles and books on venture capital and the importance to create a venture capital market for startups for private investors, not public, in the early 1990s. And I was then at Industriförbundet, the organization for big manufacturing companies primarily, and was recruited over to become the chief economist at Företagarna, which was a small business organization. And the CEO of Företagarna said he was positive to me engaging in with a group of earlier inventors and supporters of startups that had the basis up at Observatoriekullen near Stockholm School of Economics. And they were 7. And they tried to recruit me, and I said, if you can get Kurt Nicolin on board, which they claim they had, then I will sign. And as it turned out afterwards, Kurt waited for me to make my decision. And the reason was that I had published in the area. And my reason for wanting him on board was that I know him as a decision maker, not a dreamer. And I saw that the group needed a man who knew how to make decisions and when to make decisions. So finally, I was going to a United Nations mission for 5 weeks. And they said to me, when you're back, this will be started and you won't be a co-founder. So I signed. This was a Friday and I left Sweden on the Saturday and Kurt signed on Monday. So the two of us kind of became the cornerstones for the group. Kurt was the chairman of the innovation market, the marketplace for listing and managing that the legal stuff of the market. And I had to accept being a chairman of the company that found the ventures. I said to Kurt, I have no background as a board member even. And he said, I will train you. And he so did. So we had a very open relationship where he basically taught me the timing of things, which I had no idea of. I was an academic. So, the combination of me in the role of the chairman of the venture arm and me as chief economist of Företagarna led to that people wanted me to become a board member of the Swedish Venture Capital Association, which Lars had started the same year as I became a business angel in Uppsala. And there was a stipend announced on one of the board meetings for somebody who was worth the while to train. And that led to a discussion, why didn't we as board members also go abroad to learn?
Okay.
And that led via the Export Council to an arranged trip to San Diego and Silicon Valley.
Mm-hmm.
And I was invited too because I was a board member, but I couldn't go for my work. So my tax guy wanted to go. Hans-Peter Larsson, who became influential in the reform of taxes for ventures. And then my CEO of the venture arm company of the innovation market, he also went. So they said when they came back that Silicon Valley is much more fragmented and varied. So they had not found anything that we could import to Sweden. But San Diego had an organization which seemed to work well with, and that was Connect. And it so happened that the originator of Connect had come to Sweden earlier, and I had met her because of my role at Företagarna. So on a meeting at the industry fund at the IVA, the industry fund manager of the time, Lars Höjefors, who had been on the trip, he committed to supporting Connect at the start. And I, as less influential person, said that this is needed for Sweden. And then it started. Excuse me.
Amazing. Like, so STOAF, other networks, and then finally Connect. Like, so there's a wealth of knowledge here. If I were to ask about angel networks, let's start there, and then we go into individual angel investing as well. What do you think is the secret sauce for creating a successful angel network for a company?
I think it depends on what kind of focus the angel network is chosen to have. And that in the beginning for me, that was a given because it was regions that needed a renewal of their business sector. And some had heard about business angels and my role as a somebody who knew Silicon Valley and so on. So I was asked. My own initiative with STOAF gave me the possibility to see how a business angel network could be scaled with a design that was clear from the beginning. And in STOAF, it was the beginning of the second STOAF fund.
Okay.
I gave that. The first STOAF fund, I think, gave the money back, but not more. And it was weak in several respects. It was not scalable. The
Okay.
second fund was scalable, and we scaled it. Not enough to make it really good, but just to give you an example, 3 out of 14 startups went under. The others are still alive or have been acquired. And from the first fund, it's one that made a very highly priced exit from Hewlett Packard, I think it was. And one which is still growing
Okay.
as an unlisted company. But the success is also measured by that the fund itself invested, I think, around 25 millions, the ventures. And the co-investments was until the fund was closed and had no more money to invest. It raised as much in co-investments.
Okay.
So that turned out to be very important because in some of the ventures, the business angels are still investing in the same companies. And that was the idea I had when I saw what happened with Band of Angels. That the angels themselves would carry on what the fund started.
Okay.
You know, when it comes to venture funds, they have a pre-designed lifetime of 10 years, basically. And the idea is that after that, the successful ventures will be stock listed or acquired. So there was a kind of a stafette sequence of investors waiting for the spin-offs from the fund. But for business angel companies, there was no such thing.
Okay.
For that reason, I wanted to have co-investment rights. And there was a big discussion about whether that would not take away money that they would otherwise have invested in the fund. But there are solutions to that too, and we adjusted the design in the third fund for that reason.
Okay. Okay. We have a question, I think, which is quite relevant to what we are discussing right now. So Stefan from LIU Invest has a question like, how do you align angels in a network on what type of startups to invest in terms of sector, stage, criteria, given all different background preferences and competences?
Well, if you have a region outside of Stockholm, they tend to have a cluster of companies with a base know-how that determines which companies to invest in, because it's the know-how that is important. But each of the business angel companies I have been involved in actively or at the start with some training, they have been general in their purpose.
Okay.
The impact is to get new companies started and growing. And since they have company builders from the start in the angel companies as investors, there are people who know how to build companies. So I designed my input and the team around me around how to select companies with enough potential.
Okay.
If you don't find a few with high potential and get returns from them, the business angel company or network will die. And I have seen a number of examples of that. So you have to be clever in the selection of companies. Stefan is working in Linköping, I know, and I grew up in Linköping, which during my time in the 1950s had one high-tech company that was Saab and a number of medium tech companies that did not make it for a variety of reasons. And I think that the university cities in Sweden are all equipped well enough with spin-offs. I remember around the millennium shift, there was a discussion at the Royal Institute in the chapter I'm a member of about what Stockholm needed in terms of supporting functions for private investors. And one very influential guy said, we can serve Stockholm as we are. And he was the CEO of STING, Stockholm Innovation and Growth. And he said there is only around 20 startups in Stockholm that are worth supporting with private money. And those of us who had other experiences raised our voices, and I didn't even get the chance to say anything because there were many others who opposed. And he was, of course, wrong already then. And after the millennium shift, we see how the venture capital market has expanded both in terms of the numbers that are technology-based startups, which is my specialty, and outside of those. And nowadays we talk about B2B companies and B2C companies. And in the area of B2C ventures, Silicon Valley transformed very much in the 1990s, forming new investment models and new models to scale the businesses. And in terms of what is nowadays called deep techs, technology-based ventures with a technology that gives them a competitive edge at startup. Models of that type has been more slow in coming. And
Okay.
that has been my interest and why I'm still writing about the subject.
Okay. Very
Did that
interesting
give
points.
Stefan enough? Stefan is the CEO of Liu Invest.
Mm, mm.
And Liu Invest was the first investor in polar light
Okay.
technology.
Awesome. Thank you. You talked a little bit about the books, and we'll also come to polar light. But so you've written, you're a prolific writer, and you've written on venture capital and angel investing. My question to you would be, what is there an what's the science or art behind angel investing? How do you succeed as an angel investor? And in a way that would also reflect for startup founders here, like if angel investors succeeds, typically those will be the similar factors for startups to also consider when seeking capital, because eventually you want your capital to grow. Yeah. So let's go there a little bit based on your writing and how you have approached the topic.
Well, when I came home from Stanford
Mhm.
in the early 1970s, I had found my mission in life, namely to try to bring venture capital, professional venture capital to
Mhm.
Sweden, because I had seen as a researcher that we needed it.
Mhm.
So early on, I tried to influence politicians, and that's why I worked for 15 years for two big organizations. I had some influence in other fields, but in venture capital, it was like banging my head in the wall. And it's still problematic in my uh, estimation. But then I engaged privately as a business angel in 1984 and continued with the innovation market 10 years later. And that was because I thought I could make some minor impact with people I worked with there. But basically, I did not find myself in a structure where I could be a small contributor. So it was only when I got my pension
Okay.
at the year of 65 that I could support myself and get fully engaged in building a structure around STOAF that was possible to kind of have not eternal life, but there was more than one fund. And the research was because I saw that we lacked know-how, both myself and others.
Mhm.
Uh, I came to write books on my time, and that was also paid for by earlier pension rights acquired. And I'm, when I started my research, there
Mhm.
was nobody in my field in Sweden. So I learned how to do it myself. And when I have been writing books in venture capital, it's been the same. I learn because I practice, and I teach and learn from the interaction with other business angels.
Okay.
So, book writing is a way for me to fulfill my mission if people either read my books or go to one of my courses. So, and in this third book on best practice venture capital, I have come to write it as an expert system.
Okay.
In the early 1990s, software came that provided software for so-called expert systems. And what I now am writing is for startups that are badly needed in market economies because of the unfair competition from countries and companies that are supported by governments in other countries. And so the West is being challenged, in my humble experience. And we need to develop our own Silicon Valleys all over Europe. And in order to save this, save the leadership in terms of our standards of living, and be able to maintain the liberal trading and investment system we have created after the Second World War. So I hope that this third book will be published and read, and that people can learn from it. But it is, and now I'm coming back to Linköping.
Okay.
The catalyzing event that made me decide to write this third book was when I went to a pitch in Linköping where Polar Light was presented. And I immediately saw that it had more than one core technology, and that each core technology had markets which were huge, several markets. And that's about as complex as a startup can get. And in Sweden, we have learned to select and guide startups that focus on one product and one market, and based on one core technology. And we are not very good at multi-core and generic startups. And my knowledge came from my first venture capital book as a theoretical concept. And I know that if I was going to write a third book, I needed to expand into the field of multi-text and generic tech. So that's when I was asked to get engaged by the founder of Polar Light. I knew that no venture fund in Sweden would go in with early stage financing, and that the only way in which it was would be possible to raise financing was from business angels. So STOAF number 3, I had to resign from because of conflicts of interest. And you can't sit with so engaged in the venture as I knew I had to be with my team, and at the same time decide for a fund which had private capital in it. So I decided I should again jump into the cold water and learn how it could be made. And it's been 3 years in September. Still in the cold water, but we see the shore now. And that's very promising. The
All right.
company has been great in achieving great technical challenges. And we have a market that is much greater than we saw when we did our due diligence. So this May, June have seen that all the business angels that have supported the company,
Mm.
many of them from Linköping and Norrköping, all of them are now supplemented by STOAF number 3 as the main investor by Almi Invest, by Butterfly, which is a Finnish Swedish fund, and that was to me a very important step.
Okay.
But I sat yesterday in a meeting where we discussed future strategies for such a complex venture. And as you know, when you have complexity, you have a roadmap with many detours that are possible and tempting to make. So you need a structure in your way of thinking that optimizes the returns to capital and competence.
True.
And this is what I have come up with in my first book, and that I now have supplemented. I have 3 analytical frameworks which help us in selecting startups with a high degree of accuracy,
Okay.
in designing the venture deals between investors and founders, so that the incentives to succeed are great for both parties, and then to guide the founders and other key specialists on the journey through the early stage years.
Okay.
And that journey is dominated by downside risks. And it's the handling of the downside risks that are sometimes not very well and not very well understood by investors either. And the more complex the startup is, the less know-how there is behind the startup from investors. So I saw that we needed some new thinking there. And last year I sat at a dinner in Palo Alto with a venture capitalist I had interviewed earlier. And he brought his wife and I brought my wife, and he explained to his wife who I was. And he said to me, he had read my first book. So he said to me, said to his wife, that this is the guy who codified the know-how methods we have developed in Silicon Valley for the first time. The book came in 2006.
Okay.
So that made me proud, and I thought, well, I shouldn't give up writing until I have this expert system.
Awesome. I think you have found your space in writing, and I think that's doing a huge service to the entire ecosystem. The accelerator that we run, some of the concepts that are coming, they are coming from how you have, as you said, codified how this works. We are close to closing the talk now. We'll round it off with one of the, I think this is an apt question coming from Jonas Wall. I'm interested to hear you elaborate on why the Swedish startup market has proven to be and is still a fortunate market, and why now is an exciting time to be an angel investor in Sweden.
Well, we have always been doing good research at some of the universities
Mhm,
in Sweden. And one field I, as an employee at Industriförbundet,
mhm.
had an influence on was R&D policies in the early
Okay.
1990s. And all parties agreed on expanding um, both the budget for R&D and also how to select. So we came well prepared in that sector from the 1990s. But
Okay.
Sweden has also prided itself from being relatively early in picking up news from leading countries
Mhm,
in the B2C market, where Sweden has more successes than in the B2B market. And that has led to many good successes and left people with big money. Then we had some reforms that became very influential, namely the skipping of the wealth tax
mhm,
and
mhm.
the inheritance tax. And people who went abroad because they wanted to avoid the high levels of taxation have
Mhm.
come back with money, with new experiences, and they have helped to renew our way of looking at ourselves.
Okay.
Sweden is no longer at the top three in
Mhm.
GDP per capita, but we have been there and we want to get back there
Okay.
because Sweden, in all its deficiencies and promises, um, has been an imperialistic company in the sense that we believe we have something to contribute to the world,
Mhm.
and you can do it in many ways through war, but you can also do it in leading other countries. And I happen to be a great believer in um, the mission that the Wallenberg family has taken upon themselves. I happen to admire the Nobel Prize as a concept from
Mhm.
the early 19th century that has proven its longevity and the value to our day. And I think we can continue to build upon that, and that Swedish culture in these areas can be and should be expanded to at least the Nordic countries.
Mhm. Mhm.
As you know, the Nobel Prize in peace, in the peace area, we shared with Norway.
Okay.
So, and I think we could do more on a Nordic basis and include the Baltic countries in taking upon ourselves a mission to influence the whole of Europe and whatever other region might be interested to build a peaceful world and eliminate autocracies
Mhm.
in the
Mhm.
long run. But that's beyond my lifetime, so I
No,
limit myself.
but that's a very important thought, and maybe a concluding thought for the session. What I see from my side in ecosystem, in the Swedish side, is that we seem to have gained it's a fuzzy positioning because the sector itself is developing. We are very strong in impact. So I think somewhere the focus from creating a pure unicorn to creating an impact unicorn, that is something which has taken a center stage in how Sweden thinks, how entrepreneur thinks, how slowly but strongly venture capitalists and angel investors and everything. So the move, so we seem to be at the top level in terms of impact venture creation. So I think
Mhm.
that's huge. Stockholm itself organized an impact hackathon. I was part of it like a couple of years ago with Deep Ecosystem. So, but we probably need to work more in securing some sort of branding around that. I think it's still fuzzy. Norken is doing it. Our non-profit ecosystem of how forensics work is doing it in one part. So there's a lot of there are several moving parts, but there needs to be some sort of paraply or some sort of process where we can take it to the next level. And that's where I think when you pointed about writing gives focus, it brings thoughts together, it becomes a center point to
Mhm.
drive the next thought building process because you need to integrate stuff for you to jump to the next level. So it provides a platform. So I think there needs to be something, that's my thought, on the impact side, which kind of brings the focus together and prepares us to take a lead in that.
I believe that all business angels
Mm,
are impact investors. Um,
exactly.
and then there are different causes to support.
Mm,
I am the original founder of Sustainable Energy
mm,
Angels, which is still going strong and which has built a link to STOAF 3. And I believe very much that in the next phase, we should look at how we could link better with other
mm,
investors. And I intended to do that with STOAF 3, but I was unable to find an interest and the means to do it. But I really think that I have learned from Polar Light and the messy capitalization journey we have had to walk there. That's the strength that we should focus on building in
mm,
the years to come. How to link up. And for that, we need to define our own roles better. And in my book, I use as a metaphor
mm.
lead investor. I write my book for lead investors.
Okay.
Why do I limit a book audience to only lead investors? Well, I don't,
Okay.
but I teach in my book that we must think about the role of the lead investors because Sweden has for such a long time been used to having public money
Mm,
investing in startups as if the institutions are lead investors, but they
okay.
cannot become lead investor in the sense we need for the future,
Mm,
because that involves sticking our fingers in our own fingers into the porridge we are supposed to eat. And, you know, if you're an employee of
mm,
one of the public sector institutions, you don't take risk with your own money.
true.
We have a case now with Östersjöstiftelsen,
Mm,
which demonstrates the importance of doing that by designing the foundation wrongly, creating ethical problems, that has led 5 chairmen to leave the foundation, and the foundation itself has done good things in investing in startups. So we need to think through our legal foundations, and I have claimed since the 1970s that Sweden has been much more interested at the political level in building infrastructure than in building institutional frameworks for the private actors in the market. So I hope next 10 years will mean a revolution in this.
Of course, true that. Lennart, thank you so much for joining us today for a very deep and involving talk. And I'll also thank here our community who joined us, raised questions. We hope to continue to learn from your expertise, your experience. So I'll reach out to you for our upcoming programs and the stuff that Connect is doing, and try to make a reconnection with you in terms of how we can build the next Connect together. Thank you so much for today.
Yes. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
inviting me.